Hey YouTube, I just wanted to make this quick video talking about, Tomb Raider copies of Uncharted. Where are people getting that impression from? Tomb Raider has always been cinematic. Tomb Raider has always been story driven. It's always had a deep narrative. Even if the story is being changed, it's still always been a very heavily story driven game, with adventure and all. Of course, the older games do feel gamey, but they have enough cutscenes and dialogue, to that their own separate stories. Like, they're each their own thing. First, let's start with core design. The first 6 Tomb Raider games were developed by Core Design, which, of course, that team is known for creating Lara Croft. A lot of us know the story of Tomb Raider by now, but for those of you that don't, that have only played the recent games and know those games, Tomb Raider was nothing like the Legend. It was nothing like our Underworld. Anniversary is close to what the old Tomb Raider was like. I mean, in terms of the fact that it retold the very first game story. But it made little changes here and there to fit the whole idea of a trilogy that Crystal Dynamics was doing when this was on the PS2 gen. But the first generation Tomb Raider, it was made to be this massive 3D adventure game. It was on, the Sega Saturn, the PC, and of course, the PlayStation. Tomb Raider also helped Sony, I guess, secure their position as, one of the big gaming companies that they are now because of the PlayStation, and, it's just easier for the team to develop the game on the PlayStation than it was for them to develop it for the Sega Saturn. Originally, they had 2 ideas for characters. Like, they were gonna have a male character originally, with the female included, but it was gonna be about a guy, which it probably would have worked for the first game, but it probably wouldn't have caught on. But for being scared of, the fact that it was too similar to Indiana Jones, they made changes. They already knew it was going to be story driven, and the main character that they were more or less describing, they realized had feminine traits, so they decided to go with their female design, which eventually became known as Lara Croft. The first game was so successful that, eventually they came out with the sequel, which said Tomb Raider 2. It was starring Lara Croft, meaning like, okay, we're officially keeping her as our character. Like, we're not going to change our character in our games. Then there was the third game, Adventures of Lara Croft. These first 3 games were written by a female. I forget her name, and I feel bad about that because, these are such amazing games, but I didn't know that it was written by a lady, and even so, it was still just as action-packed, and, it had all this other stuff like, Lara going on these adventures for her pure enjoyment, searching for all these artifacts, and now she had all these, whether they were corporations or business people chasing after her because they had their own motives for going after these artifacts. And then there was the 4th game, which, it was called The Last Revelation, pretty much like a seeming end to Lara Croft, but it actually was not her ending. It was just and it showed us a side of Lara that we had not seen. We always saw that in some cases Lara was lighthearted, but in this game took place solely in Egypt, and it was more cinematic compared to the first 3. The first 3, you actually go looking through Lara's passport books, and you get to pick which level of the game you wanted to visit, which would indicate different areas, different parts of the world. But the 4th game, The Last Revelations, took place solely in Egypt. So it was just Lara traveling all over these Egyptian tombs, like the tombs of Sent and all that. Things related to Sent. So she's traveling, and then an old mentor of hers comes up, Werner von Croy. And we get to see a bit into Lara's teen years, like the first 2 levels of the game, which actually act more or less like tutorials on how to play. Let's call this the early form of, an in-game tutorial, where we play as a teenage Lara Croft. She doesn't have any weapons on her at all. And, she's curious, but she's like, hey, this place gives me the creeps. And we more or less see what sets up the revelation that they were investigating a tomb. He got trapped inside, she got out, and now she has to deal with him. Only this is like several years later, in the fourth game. So by the end of the game, like, he acts as a villain, an antagonist, but by the end of he was just like really testing her, and at the end of the game, he actually tries to help her. Like, he tells her, hurry, come on, it's gonna collapse. The last tomb she's in, that the entrance would collapse, but she was so exhausted that she barely had the strength to run, so she was like, no more scent. She was like, it was nice seeing you again, Werner. And I was like, not so much that she was vulnerable, that she was just exhausted, and she ended up trapped in that cave, or that tomb. But then we move on to the next game. Like, this is more or less around the same time when the first movie came out, Tomb Raider Chronicles talks about some of Lara's crazy adventures that we didn't get to see, before revelations had taken place. And then by the end of the game, they find out she's alive, and she ends up in a hospital in Egypt somewhere. And then, there's Core Design's final game, which was Tomb Raider: The Angel of Darkness. Now, this game, it was pretty fun. It was buggy, but that was because Core Design was given an unfair amount of time to develop the game. They had to release the game early. They couldn't. So in other words, they couldn't test it enough to clean out all the bugs. So they cleaned out whatever they could, I'm sure, but it was still pretty buggy, and that just bothered people. And some of the mechanics were sluggish compared to probably what they would have been like if they actually had the right amount of time that they needed. And The Angel of Darkness, more or less, it was released around the same time as the second movie in 2003, Tomb Raider: The Cradle of Life. The first movie was great because, it was true to Lara's character. It introduced her family problems for the first time, and it kind of like set itself apart from the games. Now, when Crystal Dynamics took over, they more or less try to keep Core Design's story and stuff there. They just try to evolve it in some way. But they also took too much inspiration from the movies, because the mansion was like the exact build of the movies mansion. Like, because if you remember playing Tomb Raiders 1, 2, and 3, each mansion had its own, feeling. Like, it was not always the same thing. Much more like the Crystal Dynamics games. The Core Design ones were their own individual things. There was something different about each mansion that you could go to. But, Crystal Dynamics, they did good with the game, but they tried to sexualize Lara too much, and it just turned out being a bit bland. Like, the games were fun. Don't get me wrong, I love Tomb Raider. I love Lara Croft, and they kept her true to her character and all, but, it just seems like it just seemed kind of dull, the fact that they were, and I guess it was probably because they were going off of, a mythology that was already established by another development team, that they just couldn't keep up with it. Which is what brings me to the newer Tomb Raider now, the reboot, which is just called simply Tomb Raider. just like the original 1996 game. Now this game, it's going to be, a more mature experience, so it's really targeted at, let's just say the 17 and up demographic, since I'm in North America and all that stuff, but more or less a demographic that can understand the deep story narrative that they have going, since the tone of this game will be about survival. And people are wondering, like, why does it say Tomb Raider when it's a survival adventure? Well, there's still tombs involved. Lara still has to read through riddles and kind of solve the island's mysteries, because she's on an island somewhere in the Dragon's Triangle. Was that the original island that her team was planning on going to? No, they were supposed to be going to somewhere else. Like, it was her first expedition. They were going to look for a lost tomb, or explore some ancient tomb somewhere else. But in the middle of a storm, it throws them off course and sends them to the Dragon's Triangle. So, her and her group of friends get stranded. Lara wakes up. She's completely cut off from everyone else. She has to try to find everyone else. And, well, as far as we know, she finds one person, and that one person dies, and then she goes on to find the rest of her friends. And then that's when things get a little more intense, because she realizes, okay, well, we're not the only ones on this island. There's other people on this island, too. And they're more savage. Like, they acting like cannibals and all this other crazy stuff, so we gotta be careful. There's no reasoning with them. We have to do whatever we can to get it signaled that we need help. We want to get off this island, because she's running into her friends and she's running into these crazy people, but she's not willing to give up so easily. And that's one thing about Lara Crystal Dynamics has kept true. Like, her character, like, she's never been the type to get up easy. Like, to just easily say, hey, okay, I give in. She just kind of keeps fighting on, and that's why I'm glad about this new game, is because they kept that true to her. They're also trying to explain more or less why she loves to go on all these crazy adventures. What got her started on this love for having all these adrenaline rushes. And I guess you would have to go on this type of survival adventure that you're getting, all these different injuries, but you're still pushing forward. Like, a lot of people say that copy's from Uncharted, but no, actually, Tomb Raider has always had that kind of stuff happen. Maybe Lara herself wouldn't get injured, but other people around her would. She would just seem too either invincible or too close to the point of death. Like, she would never have an in-between ground. But in this case, Lara Croft is, she's more or less vulnerable. She's just learning how to do everything. This brings me to another thing people are complaining about. It's like, she has a bow? She's not going to have her dual pistols? No, why would she? I mean, this is before she knew how to use any of that stuff. Her dual pistols and all that stuff. Like, obviously she knows how to use them in the game, but this is more or less when she was, learning that she has to fight to survive, so it's not like she's, the same Lara Croft, the 25 to 30-year-old Lara Croft that we know by now. She's in her early 20s, 21. She's just learning how to survive in this crazy situation. She's learned she has to hunt for food, which is one of the things they actually say in the interview, that her first kill is important because it's that moment where she realizes she has to do this in order to survive. And that's the point they kind of want to get across. And people are complaining about the designs, like, all the wolves look the same. Well, guess what? In the past, all the wolves have looked the same in other games too. Variation would be good, but guess what? Just because variation would be good doesn't always mean it would be believable. I mean, look at some of the anime movies. They're totally believable, even if they're animated. Disney's Beauty and the Beast is one example. Like when Belle goes to run away from Beast and she gets attacked by wolves. I mean, because wolves, they're usually in packs, and most of the time they're the same color. So it would make sense that the wolves are, by design, all alike. In the games, what else? Like, my mind is just going a mile a minute, so if I stop and think for a minute, it's not that I don't know what I'm saying, it's just that, I'm trying to sort my mind out through it so I can actually say it. Are there going to be puzzles? Yes, there's going to be puzzles based around physics, so more or less, you got to interact with the environment. That's another thing that Tomb Raider has always been about, interacting with the environment in terms of puzzles. They kept that. Uncharted kind of copied from that. Uncharted did copy from all that. I mean, everything in Uncharted was inspired by Tomb Raider. So I don't get where people are saying that, Tomb Raider is copying Uncharted. Uncharted copied Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider is just kind of reabsorbing itself back in a modern way and taking the more cinematic approach. Inspired, I guess. Uncharted might have inspired the cinematicness, but the gameplay in Uncharted has always been inspired by Tomb Raider. That is a given, because Uncharted started in 2007, Tomb Raider in 1996. The only real difference is Nathan Drake, he goes searching through tombs for money. Lara Croft, she's rich, so she does it for fun. That's the only major difference. Other than that, Uncharted copied Tomb Raider. Lara Croft, she's been there for the longest. So compared to Lara, Nathan is still pretty much a baby. And Nathan Drake gets shot and everything, and I don't know, it just seems like he's more invincible than Lara at this point. If he's getting shot up, walking like, oh, I'm fine, it's it's just a bullet wound. Oh, it doesn't matter if it's right in the middle of my stomach, my important organs or all that stuff. Like, I'm fine. While Lara, they actually show more or less that she's in pain in this new game. She gets impaled, I think more or less in one of her sides, like by her hip or something, and she's like, like she's screaming in pain. Like, that makes it a bit more real, like when you're actually hearing the pain and seeing it on your character. In this case, Lara Croft. But yes, so this isn't the first Tomb Raider that's been in only one location in terms of parts of the world. This is also not the first Tomb Raider to have such a deep narrative, or be linear, because all Tomb Raider games are linear. All of them. They have exploration, but they're all linear. And it's supposed to feel like a movie. It's a cinematic experience. And most of it will be gameplay. They'll be like, because from what I've seen of the cutscenes, they were only like maybe 30 seconds to a minute long. That's not bad. And you keep in mind, they were showing us the first 30 minutes of gameplay. The game is about maybe 10 hours. So that's nothing. And of course, the beginning is, you're going to have all these cutscenes, because in the beginning, it's trying to show you more or less what's going on. It's trying to set things up. So they have to have a lot of cutscenes, even if they're small. But anyway, that's just a point I wanted to make, and I'll leave my video here. Anyway, comment, rate, subscribe. Talk soon. Have a nice day, y'all.